David had been a royal guard for almost a decade. Every day he walked the same corridors, patrolled the same gardens, and stood at the same gates. To most people, his life might have seemed repetitive, even dull, but David saw something different in it. He saw duty, a purpose, and the quiet pride that came from protecting a place where history and people intertwined. The palace was more than stone and walls. It was a living piece of a nation, a symbol of safety and tradition. And he was part of that safety, even if no one outside ever noticed. That evening, the sun had dipped low, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. David finished his afternoon cup of tea in the small guardhouse near the east gate. The air was warm but not too hot, and a soft breeze carried the smell of flowers from the palace gardens. Everything felt calm. He liked these moments before the shift. They reminded him why he had chosen this life. The uniform, the rules, the discipline, they were not burdens but parts of a role he had grown into, like breathing or walking. As he stepped out of the guardhouse, David adjusted his hat and straightened his jacket. The palace grounds were quiet. Most of the tourists had left hours ago, and the staff were finishing their evening routines. The guards rotated along the walls and gates, keeping their posts, exchanging nods and small greetings. It was a system built on trust and precision. David felt confident in it as he had countless times before. But something caught his attention. A shadow flickered across the street just beyond the palace walls. At first he thought it was a stray animal, maybe a dog or a cat. But as he watched, he noticed movement. 3 figures standing near the corner, talking quietly but with attention that didn't belong in this usually peaceful area. David didn't panic. He had learned to trust his instincts, to notice the little details that most people ignored. The figures weren't moving like tourists or local residents. Their posture was tense, their heads turned as if scanning the surroundings. Their hands weren't idle. David's gut told him something was off. He continued his patrol, keeping a calm pace. As he walked, he thought about what he could do if the situation escalated. He had training, years of it, and every part of his body remembered it. But he also knew that training alone didn't guarantee safety. He needed awareness, timing, and calmness. That was what kept guards like him alive in dangerous situations. The 3 figures noticed him now. One of them stepped forward slightly, watching him closely. The air seemed to change, a small shift that David could feel in his chest. He wasn't afraid, not really. Fear was natural, but it was also something to control, something to channel. His hand hovered near the edge of his belt, not reaching for anything, just ready if needed. David continued walking, pretending to pay attention to the palace gates and the surrounding walls. But his eyes were sharp, tracking the 3 men without making it obvious. They didn't try to hide anymore. Their conversation stopped and they simply watched him. A chill ran down David's spine. Not because he doubted himself, but because he had learned to trust the warning signals that came from deep inside. The street beyond the palace was narrow, lined with old buildings and small shops that had long closed for the day. There was a sense of isolation here, a place where few people passed after sunset. David knew that if anything happened here, there would be little chance of immediate help. That thought sharpened his focus, made his senses alert. He remembered a story one of the senior guards had told him years ago. A guard had faced a similar situation, cornered by a group who meant harm, outnumbered but calm and precise. That guard survived because he didn't panic, because he thought through every movement before acting. David thought about that now. He needed the same mindset: observe, assess, act, but most importantly, stay calm. As he approached a small alley, the 3 men moved. Slowly, deliberately, they positioned themselves in a way that narrowed his path. It was subtle but clear. David realized he was being cornered. The alley had walls on either side, high enough that escape to the sides was impossible. Only forward and backward were options, and behind him was the open street he had just passed. David stopped. His body was relaxed but ready. His eyes met the eyes of the man in front, the apparent leader. There was a flicker of recognition there, not of him personally, but of the uniform he wore. The Royal Guard's jacket, polished shoes, hat perfectly in place. It all said authority and discipline. Some people respected it. Some people hated it. And these men clearly had no respect, only challenge. The leader took a step closer, smirking, a little too confident. David felt the tension in the air grow. It was like electricity, invisible but undeniable. The other 2 moved closer, flanking him from each side. Now he was surrounded just as the instincts in his gut had warned. For a moment the world seemed to slow. David's mind cleared. He wasn't thinking about fear or pain. He was thinking about observation. Every movement mattered. The way the men shifted their weight, the angle of their shoulders, the way their hands twitched. Every detail told a story, a plan, an intention. He remembered his training drills. One-on-one combat, yes, but also multiple attackers. The drills taught him to use momentum, leverage, and precision. It wasn't about strength. It was about balance, timing, and awareness. David felt a strange calm wash over him. He wasn't trapped. He was aware. And awareness gave him options. The leader spoke, a low, mocking voice. "Evening, guard. Looks like you're all alone tonight." David nodded slightly, replying evenly. "Evening. You seem to be out late." His voice was calm, almost conversational. He didn't want to escalate with words, but he wanted to gauge their reactions, test their resolve. The second man laughed, a harsh, short sound, then stepped forward slightly. His hands were empty, but his posture suggested he was ready to strike if needed. David noticed the movement and made a mental note. This man was quick, probably the first to attack if they all moved. The third man stayed back slightly, watching, observing, maybe ready to support or maybe hesitant. David realized that hesitation could be a weakness, but he also knew that unpredictability was dangerous. He had to be ready for anything. As they circled him slowly, David's mind replayed scenarios. If one lunged, he would pivot, using their momentum against them. If another tried to grab him, he would leverage his body, shift his weight, and create space. One misstep for them could be their downfall. One careful move for him could turn the situation. David's breathing remained steady. Not a deep inhale or forced exhale, just natural, controlled breathing. It was more than a habit. It was a tool. It kept his focus sharp, his movements precise. The three men might have thought they were intimidating him, but David knew something they didn't. Fear could be seen, hesitation could be seen, and either would give them an advantage. He had none of that. A car passed on the street beyond the alley, the headlights cutting through the growing darkness. The sound of the engine seemed distant, almost dreamlike. For a moment, David let his eyes drift to it, then back to the three men. Nothing distracted him. Nothing shook his focus. He noticed small details now. The crease in the leader's sleeve, the scuff on the second man's shoe, the slight shift in the third man's stance. Each tiny movement told a story. These men were confident, yes, but not infallible. Confidence without control could be dangerous. David's training had taught him that. He prepared himself mentally, running through the possibilities. One move from them, one counter from him, and the moment would pass. He didn't know exactly what would happen in the next minute, but he trusted that his preparation would carry him through. Time seemed to stretch. David's focus sharpened. Every second mattered. The men were testing him now, moving closer, trying to gauge his reaction. But he remained calm, letting them make the first move, knowing that the first real mistake could determine the outcome. David's thoughts drifted briefly, not to fear, not to injury, but to the duty that had brought him here. Protecting the palace, maintaining order, being the shield between chaos and safety. That sense of purpose grounded him, gave him strength beyond physical ability. The alley felt smaller now, the walls taller, the space tighter. But David didn't feel trapped. Awareness was his advantage. Calmness was his tool. And preparation was his ally. He took a small, deliberate step forward, signaling subtly that he was ready, that he wasn't intimidated, that he was not an easy target. The leader's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. Confidence wavered. David noticed it immediately. It was the first crack, the first sign that control could shift. The moment before action, before confrontation, was here, and David was ready. The moment stretched, heavy with tension. David could feel it in the way the three men's shoulders tensed, the way their eyes flicked between him and each other. They weren't just standing there, they were sizing him up, testing his reactions, daring him to make a mistake. Every instinct he had told him that this was the crucial moment, the second before chaos, the point where control could slip either way. The leader took a deliberate step closer. His face was set in a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Confidence radiated from him, the kind that came from thinking you had the upper hand. David didn't flinch. He didn't shift his weight nervously. he simply observed. Every detail mattered. The leader's hand hovering near his belt, the way the second man's knees bent slightly, ready to spring, the subtle twitch in the third man's jaw that hinted at impatience. "You don't look scared," the leader said, his voice low, almost a growl. "I expected more." David shook his head slowly. "I don't need to be scared," he replied calmly. "You're just men, that's all." His tone wasn't mocking, not meant to provoke, but measured. He wanted to convey that he saw clearly, that he understood the danger, and that he had no intention of giving it power over him. The second man laughed harshly, stepping forward to the side, trying to create pressure. "You're bold," he said. "Maybe too bold." He clenched his fists, his fingers curling tightly, ready to strike at any sudden movement. The third man shifted, moving slightly behind the leader, his eyes scanning the surroundings as if he expected backup to appear at any moment. David's training kicked in fully now. His senses sharpened. He noticed the angle of the street, the walls on either side, the uneven pavement beneath his boots. He noticed the weight distribution of each man, the way their muscles tensed, ready to react. He didn't have weapons. He didn't need them yet. Every movement, every decision would count. The leader made the first move, sudden and fast. He lunged forward, his fist swinging toward David's chest. Time seemed to slow in David's mind. Years of drills, years of reflexes honed to precision, all came together in one instant. David didn't step back. Instead, he shifted his weight slightly to the side, letting the leader's momentum carry him past. With one swift motion, he caught the leader's arm, guiding it away from his body while keeping his own balance steady. The second man reacted immediately, rushing in from the side. He swung a heavy fist toward David's head. David ducked just in time, feeling the air rush past his ear as the punch missed. He spun, using the second man's movement against him, twisting the man's arm slightly to unbalance him. The third man moved to intercept, trying to grab David from behind, but David anticipated it. With a quick pivot, he pushed forward, forcing the third man off balance, stumbling slightly. The three men were now fully engaged, but David's calm control gave him an advantage. He wasn't fighting with raw aggression. He was using technique, leverage, and awareness. Each attack met a precise counter, each movement calculated to neutralize rather than escalate unnecessarily. He wasn't trying to hurt them badly, just enough to control, to survive, to protect himself. The leader recovered quickly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. He had expected fear, hesitation, but he had underestimated David. The smirk faltered, replaced by concentration, determination to regain the upper hand. He swung again, faster this time, but David blocked the punch, stepping to the side and using the leader's momentum to push him lightly against the wall. The impact was enough to halt the attack without causing serious injury. The second man roared, frustration breaking through his calm facade. He grabbed at David, trying to wrestle control, but David was ready. He twisted under the grasp, using his weight and balance to slip free, then stepped back, maintaining distance. The third man lunged again, this time aiming for David's side. David pivoted, bringing a leg up just enough to trip him slightly, causing him to stumble without falling. For a moment, the alley was a whirlwind of motion, arms swinging, feet shifting, bodies moving in sharp, controlled bursts. David's breathing was steady, each inhale and exhale natural but precise, keeping his mind clear. He didn't panic. He didn't overthink. Every move flowed from training and instinct, combined with awareness of the environment and his attackers. Despite the chaos, David's mind was clear enough to notice small details that could be critical. The leader's left shoulder was slightly lower now, leaving a small opening. The second man's stance had widened, making him less mobile. The third man's focus was too much on David's upper body, leaving him vulnerable to lower attacks. Each tiny observation was a potential advantage, a thread he could use to control the outcome. The leader swung again, this time a high strike aimed at David's head. David leaned back slightly, feeling the air from the strike brush past his face. He countered immediately, stepping in close to reduce the power behind the next blow. With a precise movement, he grabbed the leader's wrist and pushed, guiding him past and off balance. The leader stumbled against the wall, his eyes widening for just a second before he recovered. The second man tried to take advantage of the distraction, moving faster, more aggressively. But David anticipated it. He shifted his weight, pivoted, and used the man's momentum to guide him forward. A small push against the shoulder sent the man stumbling, forcing him to pause and regain footing. The third man, realizing the first two were struggling to gain ground, tried to change tactics. He aimed a low sweep toward David's legs, attempting to knock him off balance. David's response was immediate. He jumped slightly, avoiding the sweep, then planted his feet firmly, ready to respond to the next attack. David realized something important in that instant. These men were aggressive, yes, but uncoordinated. They relied on strength and speed, not technique or awareness. That gave him the edge. He didn't need to overpower them. He just needed to stay calm, read their movements, and respond precisely. The alley seemed to close in around them, walls pressing inward, shadows stretching across the ground. But David didn't feel trapped. Every movement, every step was part of a pattern he could read, a rhythm he could anticipate. His calmness was his ally, his awareness his weapon. The leader, recovering from his stumble, growled and lunged again. David sidestepped, feeling the energy of the attack pass by, and used it to push the leader slightly to the side. The second man, frustrated, swung wildly, missing again. David caught his arm, twisted gently, and guided him past, keeping control. The third man tried to rush in again, but David shifted, using his body to block, keeping all three at manageable distances. In that moment, everything felt heightened. Time seemed to stretch and contract at once. David's senses were alive. The scrape of shoes against pavement, the subtle shifting of weight, the faint sound of breath and movement from each man. Every small detail mattered. Every choice could decide the outcome. David moved with precision, blocking, guiding, and controlling each attack. He didn't strike with unnecessary force. He didn't panic. His training, his awareness, and his calm merged into a single flow of action. The three men began to realize that their aggression, their confidence, their plan wasn't enough. This guard was not like anyone they had faced before. The leader swung once more, but this time David was ready. He shifted under the attack, guided the arm to the side, and used a small controlled push to send the man slightly off balance. The second man tried to take advantage, but David pivoted, moving between attacks, keeping control over distance and positioning. The third man hesitated, sensing that their attacks were being neutralized. For a brief moment, all three men paused. David's calmness, his control, his presence, it was disarming. They were aggressive, reckless, but they had underestimated him. Their confidence wavered, frustration crept in, and hesitation began to show. David didn't move aggressively. He simply maintained readiness, eyes sharp, body balanced, prepared for the next move. The alley, once a place of potential danger, now became a stage for control. David was not acting on fear or anger. He was acting on training, awareness, and instinct. The three men were forced into reaction. Their attempts to dominate met with precision and calm. David's mind worked clearly. He assessed, adjusted, and acted. Each movement was deliberate. Each choice mattered. He knew that the next few seconds could decide everything. He had the advantage now, not because of strength, not because of numbers, but because of calmness, focus, and preparation. The three men realized finally that this was not going to be easy. They had come prepared to intimidate and attack, but they were meeting someone who refused to panic, who refused to be controlled by fear, someone who had skill, awareness, and composure. David breathed evenly, his body relaxed yet ready. The fight had begun, yes, but he controlled its pace. He watched, waited, and prepared for the next move, knowing that within the next minute everything could change. This part fully develops the confrontation, building tension and showing David's skill, awareness, and calm under pressure. It sets up for the intense climax in Part 3, where David's quick thinking and training lead to decisive action. The alley seemed smaller now, every wall pressing closer, as if it knew what was about to happen. David's eyes darted from one attacker to the next, measuring every twitch, every movement. They were aggressive but predictable, each man relying on strength over thought. That predictability was his advantage. He didn't panic. He didn't overthink. He moved like he always had in training. Calm, precise, ready for the moment when a single move could change everything. The leader, frustration building, lunged again. His arm came at David with a sharp, fast strike aimed at the chest. David sidestepped, letting the arm pass, then pivoted his body to guide the attacker's momentum sideways. With a gentle but firm push, the leader stumbled into the wall. He tried to catch himself, but ended up leaning against the rough surface, momentarily off balance. David's eyes never left him, careful not to overcommit, careful to maintain control over the situation. The second man, seeing the leader falter, charged next. His fist swung toward David's head in a wide, powerful arc. David ducked slightly, letting the fist pass over him, then stepped in close. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisting just enough to disrupt his balance without causing injury, and used a small push to send him staggering a step back. The third man rushed to intervene, swinging a leg low toward David's side, trying to knock him off balance. David anticipated the sweep and jumped, landing firmly with both feet on the ground, ready to counter the next movement. Time seemed stretched in those moments. Every second was filled with observation and calculation. David's mind worked clearly, analyzing each threat, predicting each movement. He noticed the way the second man's shoulders tensed before every swing, the angle of the third man's knees when he tried to push forward, the slight imbalance in the leader's stance after stumbling against the wall. Each detail was an opportunity, a small advantage he could use. David realized that they were beginning to hesitate. Confidence was wavering. The leader's smirk had disappeared, replaced by a flash of doubt. The second man's attacks had become more forceful but less precise. The third man was moving cautiously, trying not to overextend. This hesitation, this break in their rhythm, was all he needed. He didn't rush. He simply prepared, waiting for the right moment to act. The leader recovered and charged again, this time swinging low toward David's midsection. David stepped in, catching the arm, and guided the momentum past him. With a swift movement, he shifted his body and applied a controlled push, sending the leader stumbling into the second man. The impact threw both off balance for a moment. David noticed the opening immediately. He didn't strike. He didn't need to. The stumble itself had shifted the control of the fight into his hands. The second man tried to recover quickly, swinging a wide punch. David sidestepped, moving fluidly, and used the man's momentum to guide him forward, causing him to stumble again. The third man lunged from the side, but David pivoted, staying light on his feet, keeping the attacker at a manageable distance. It was like a dance, each movement controlled, each response precise. The three men were strong, but David's calm and strategic approach was overpowering their aggression. David realized he had less than a minute to end the confrontation. If he could maintain control, if he could stay precise, he could neutralize the threat before it escalated further. He focused on the leader first, the one who seemed to coordinate the others. With a quick step, he blocked a swing, shifted the leader's weight to the side, and guided him into the wall again. The impact stunned the man for a brief moment, enough for David to turn his attention to the second attacker. The second man had tried to swing again, but David was faster. He sidestepped, grabbed the man's wrist, and applied a controlled twist. The man's arm was guided behind him, forcing him to the ground on his knees. David didn't push harshly. He simply guided him, keeping control without causing serious harm. The third man, seeing the others falter, hesitated. David didn't wait. He moved forward, keeping his body balanced, ready to respond to any sudden move. The third man lunged quickly, aiming for a strike to David's side. David shifted, using the man's momentum to spin him around, guiding him off balance and onto the ground. In less than a minute, all three attackers had been controlled, neutralized without severe injury. David stood, breathing steadily, surveying the situation. The alley was quiet now, the air still but tense, carrying the echoes of the brief struggle. David didn't celebrate. He didn't shout or boast. He simply assessed the scene. The three men were disoriented, frustrated, and clearly surprised by how quickly their attack had failed. They weren't seriously hurt, but they were forced to acknowledge that David had skill, calm, and control. His presence, his training, and his awareness had shifted the outcome in an instant. He took a few steps forward, keeping his eyes on them. "You don't have to do this," he said calmly. "Walk away now. That's your only safe choice." The words were not threatening. They were measured, deliberate. It was a warning wrapped in calm authority. The leader, still leaning against the wall, glanced at his companions. Frustration and surprise mixed on his face. He realized they had underestimated David. He realized that aggression alone was not enough. Slowly he nodded, signaling the others to step back. They hesitated, then reluctantly obeyed, retreating toward the end of the alley. David didn't lower his guard. He followed their movements with his eyes, ready in case they tried anything else. As they disappeared into the shadows, David felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. His body was still alert, muscles tense from the quick movements, but his mind was clear. He had survived, controlled the situation, and protected himself without unnecessary violence. The training, the years of preparation, the calm focus, they had all worked. He took a deep breath, letting the tension leave his body slowly. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the natural exhaustion that comes after a burst of extreme focus. He glanced at the walls of the alley, the rough surfaces that had become his environment for the past minute. Everything was still, quiet again, but the memory of the confrontation lingered, vivid and sharp. David knew this wasn't over. The three men would remember this encounter, and he would remain vigilant for any further trouble. But he also knew that he had proven something important, to himself, to them, to anyone who might underestimate him. Calm, skill, and awareness could outweigh aggression, control could outweigh chaos, and preparation could outweigh unpredictability. He walked slowly back toward the main street, adjusting his uniform, keeping his posture straight and his eyes alert. The palace was not far, and safety was close, but David didn't relax completely. He had learned that vigilance was part of his role. Even a single lapse could change everything. As he emerged from the alley into the open street, he noticed the soft sounds of the city evening. A car passed, people walked in the distance, and the air carried the faint scent of food from a nearby cafe. Life continued as usual for everyone else, unaware of the brief, intense encounter that had just unfolded. David reflected on what had happened. It wasn't about glory. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about duty. About using the skills he had learned to protect himself and maintain safety. The three men had been a threat, yes, but they had also been a test of focus, skill, calmness, and presence. And he had passed that test. He reached the palace gates and paused for a moment, looking back toward the alley. The shadows had swallowed the three attackers, but their presence still lingered in his mind. He allowed himself a small smile. Not from pride, but from satisfaction in having handled the situation correctly. He had stayed calm. He had stayed precise. And he had controlled what could have become a dangerous moment. David returned to his patrol path, walking steadily along the palace walls. The sun had set completely now, and the lights of the palace cast a warm glow across the grounds. The gardens were quiet, the fountains sparkling in the soft light. Everything felt normal again, peaceful. But David knew that calm was fragile. Awareness, focus, and preparedness were always necessary, because danger could appear in a single, unexpected moment. He adjusted his hat slightly, straightened his jacket, and continued walking. His mind was alert but calm. The events of the alley were behind him, yet the lessons remained. Confidence without arrogance, aggression without control, and courage without panic. They were all tested in that brief minute. And David had managed them all. As he moved along the familiar path, he thought about how people would never know what had happened. No headlines, no recognition, just another day in the life of a royal guard. But that was enough for him. He didn't need applause or fame. The knowledge that he had maintained control, protected himself, and upheld his duty was all the reward he needed. And so, he continued his evening patrol, calm, focused, and ready for whatever might come next. The world around him moved as usual, but David carried with him the quiet proof of a skill honed through years of training, patience, and unwavering focus. The minute-long confrontation was over, but the lessons and the awareness it reinforced would remain with him for the rest of his life. The alley fell silent after the three men stumbled away, retreating into the shadows. David stood for a moment, breathing steadily, muscles tense but controlled, eyes scanning the street beyond. The danger had passed, at least for now, but he knew the city had a way of hiding trouble until it reappeared. He didn't let relief make him careless. A royal guard's job never truly ended. The street was quiet, save for distant footsteps and the occasional hum of a car passing by. People who walked by seemed unaware of what had just occurred. For them, it was an ordinary evening, calm and routine. David knew they had no way of knowing that just minutes ago. A confrontation had played out that could have turned violent in an instant. He took a slow step forward, returning to his patrol route along the palace walls. Each movement was deliberate, his senses still alert, scanning the surroundings, noticing the smallest shifts in shadows or sounds. Even after the immediate threat had passed, vigilance remained necessary. The three men might have fled, but they had learned something from the encounter. They had seen what a trained guard could do, and that knowledge could influence their choices in the future. David walked past the small alley where the fight had occurred. He took note of the uneven pavement, the walls that had briefly trapped him, and the narrow space where the attackers had tried to corner him. Everything was part of his awareness now. Even a place that seemed ordinary could become a site of danger in an instant. As he continued, he noticed a few bystanders farther down the street. They weren't close enough to have witnessed the fight, but David knew that word could spread. His calm presence and steady movement projected confidence. Even in chaos, people often take cues from those who remain composed. That was one of the unspoken duties of a guard, providing reassurance, silently showing that safety was being maintained. David paused briefly near the main gate, checking the surrounding streets for any sign of the three men or anyone connected to them. His eyes swept left and right, noting every detail. He could see shadows shifting, but nothing suspicious. His mind remained focused, but his body began to release the tension that had built up during the confrontation. Muscles that had been tight for the past few minutes gradually relaxed, though his awareness never faltered. Moments like this were when reflection came naturally. David thought about the fight, not with pride, not with a need to relive it, but as a way to understand and learn. He had acted quickly, precisely, and without hesitation. He had controlled the attackers without causing serious harm, relying on calmness and skill instead of brute force. It was a validation of his years of training, but it was also a reminder of the responsibility that came with that training. The palace staff, noticing David's return, gave him small nods or brief greetings. There was an unspoken understanding between them. They could see he was alert, composed, and in control, even if they didn't know exactly why. That silent acknowledgement was part of the rhythm of life around the palace, guards and staff working together to maintain order, each understanding the other's role without needing words. David continued his patrol along the walls, moving with the same calm precision that had defined the confrontation. He passed the gardens where the fountains glimmered in the evening lights, the flowers slightly rustling in the soft breeze. The peaceful surroundings were a stark contrast to the intensity of the alley just moments ago. Life went on, but David carried with him the memory of what had happened. It wasn't something he dwelled on with excitement or fear. It was simply a part of his duty, a reminder that vigilance could never waver. He thought about the three attackers and their likely reactions. They had underestimated him. They had assumed that aggression and intimidation would be enough to control the situation. But David had shown that composure, awareness, and skill could outweigh raw strength. That lesson wasn't just for them. It was a lesson he carried within himself, reinforcing his confidence without breeding arrogance. A patrol car passed on the main street nearby, its lights reflecting off the buildings. David observed it calmly, noting the routine of the city outside the palace walls. Life moved forward as it always did, unaware of the small, intense moments that sometimes occurred in hidden corners. The contrast between chaos and calm, between danger and normalcy, was a reminder of the unpredictable nature of life. And it reinforced the importance of preparedness. David's thoughts shifted to the concept of heroism. To many, being a hero meant dramatic public acts, accolades, or recognition. But David knew that true heroism often existed in quiet moments, in decisions made in seconds, in actions taken to prevent harm rather than to attract attention. The confrontation had been brief, intense, and over in less than a minute, but its significance lingered. It was a demonstration of control, courage, and responsibility, all of which mattered more than applause or recognition. As he rounded the corner toward the palace's main entrance, he noticed the three men again, now at a distance partially hidden by shadows. They were regrouping, talking quietly among themselves, their movements cautious. David didn't approach them aggressively, but he maintained awareness, noting their positions and demeanor. They had learned something, but they were not yet neutralized in terms of potential threat. His presence alone could influence their behavior, encouraging them to leave rather than escalate. David continued forward, keeping a steady pace while his mind cataloged every detail. He observed the city lights, the distant hum of traffic, and the few pedestrians moving along the streets. Everything was part of the environment he needed to monitor. Even a brief lapse in attention could allow danger to return unnoticed. He reached the main entrance and paused again, taking a moment to check the perimeter. The palace gates were secure, the guard stationed nearby alert and composed. David felt a sense of relief, not because he had triumphed over the attackers, but because order had been maintained, and the palace remained safe. That was the goal, the purpose behind every action he took. A few moments later, another guard approached, noticing David's calm yet alert demeanor. "Everything all right?" the guard asked quietly. David nodded. "All clear. Situation handled." He didn't elaborate. There was no need. The details of the confrontation were private, and unnecessary disclosure could complicate matters. Trust among the guards and staff was based on professionalism and discretion, not on sharing every detail of conflict. The other guard gave a small nod, satisfied. David continued his patrol, moving through the palace grounds, observing every gate, every corridor, and every path. Awareness was not limited to moments of immediate danger. It was a constant responsibility. Every step, every glance, and every interaction carried the potential to prevent harm and maintain security. As he walked, David reflected on the nature of human behavior. The three men had acted out of aggression, confidence, and perhaps desperation. Their actions were predictable in some ways, dangerous in others. David understood their motivations not to justify them, but to anticipate and counter them effectively. Awareness included understanding people, their intentions, tendencies, and limitations. That insight was just as important as physical skill. By the time he returned to a central courtyard within the palace grounds, David's breathing had fully settled, and his muscles relaxed, though his mind remained alert. He watched the evening lights reflect off the stone walls, the gentle sway of trees in the gardens, and the calm routine of staff preparing to leave for the day. The contrast between the chaos of the alley and the serenity of the palace highlighted the fragile balance that he maintained every day. David paused near a fountain, taking a quiet moment to reflect. The confrontation had been intense, but it had passed without serious injury. He had relied on training, skill, awareness, and calmness to control the situation. Each factor had been crucial, and the combination had allowed him to manage the threat effectively. That clarity of mind, the ability to act decisively under pressure, was something he valued deeply. He thought about the three men again. They had fled, but their presence lingered as a reminder that danger could appear anywhere, even in the most familiar places. David didn't dwell on fear, but he didn't ignore caution. Preparation, vigilance, and composure were his tools, and he carried them constantly. The palace staff moved quietly around him, exchanging greetings and performing their duties. David offered small nods in return, maintaining his focus while acknowledging the human presence around him. Part of being a guard wasn't just physical protection. It was maintaining a sense of calm and order for those who depended on it. Every gesture, every movement reinforced that sense of security. David walked along the palace corridors, checking gates and entrances, observing shadows and lights, and listening for unusual sounds. His mind cataloged each detail, noting potential risks and safe zones alike. The confrontation had been brief, but it was a test of skill, awareness, and composure, and its lessons would remain with him. By the time he reached the central gate again, the night had grown darker. The palace lights shone brightly, casting warm glows on the surrounding walls. Everything appeared calm and orderly, but David knew that vigilance was never complete. Potential threats could emerge anywhere at any time. Preparedness was not an occasional practice, it was a constant state of mind. David took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. The three men had been controlled without unnecessary violence. The palace remained secure, and the responsibility of protection had been fulfilled successfully. It was a quiet victory, unseen by most, yet significant in its own right. As he continued his evening patrol, David understood something essential. True skill wasn't measured by confrontation alone. It was measured by calmness, awareness, precision, and the ability to maintain control under pressure. The alley had tested him, the three attackers had tested him, and he had passed. That knowledge reinforced his confidence, but also reminded him of the importance of humility and focus. And so, David moved through the palace grounds, calm, vigilant, and prepared for whatever might come next. The night was quiet, the city unaware of the intense moment that had just passed, but David carried the memory clearly. It was a reminder of his purpose, his skill, and the quiet courage that defined his duty as a royal guard. The days after the alley confrontation passed quietly for David, but the memory of that brief, intense moment stayed with him. Life in the palace continued as usual. Patrols, routines, greetings with staff, and the steady rhythm of people coming and going. But David carried a new awareness with him. He felt a quiet confidence, not arrogance, but the assurance that skill, calmness, and focus could protect not only himself, but also those around him. Word had traveled among the palace staff about what had happened, though details were scarce. The three men had been seen wandering near the alley afterward, their faces tense, their behavior cautious. David didn't seek recognition, and he didn't need it. For him, the significance of the event was personal and professional. The knowledge that he had maintained control and prevented harm was enough. Yet despite his quiet pride, David also reflected on the fragility of the moment. One misstep, one slight lapse in judgment, and the outcome could have been very different. He understood that skill alone wasn't enough. Composure and awareness were equally important. The human element, the ability to stay calm under pressure, to read movements, to anticipate reactions, was what had made the difference. The palace continued to hum with routine. Guards rotated posts, staff moved through corridors, and visitors followed their paths. To anyone else, nothing had changed. To David, however, every detail seemed sharper. The angle of a shadow, the weight of a hand on a railing, the subtle movement of people in the distance all carried potential meaning. He didn't live in fear, but he lived in vigilance, understanding that life could change in a single instant. A week passed, and David was called to a small ceremony at the palace. A senior officer approached him with a formal nod. "You handled the situation in the alley with remarkable skill," the officer said quietly. "Your composure and awareness prevented what could have been a serious incident." David inclined his head politely. He did not feel the need for words of praise. The recognition was not what mattered. What mattered was that he had upheld his duty, protected the palace, and maintained control over a dangerous situation. Still, the acknowledgement from his peers carried a weight of respect that he quietly appreciated. It was a reminder that professionalism and calm action did not go unnoticed, even when the public remained unaware. That evening, David returned to the alley where the confrontation had occurred. The shadows were softer now, the street quieter and the air calm. He walked slowly, observing the space with the same careful attention he had in the moment of the fight, but without the tension. The memory of the three attackers was still vivid, but it no longer carried the sharp edge of danger. Instead, it was a reminder of preparedness, skill, and responsibility. He paused for a moment, looking at the walls and the pavement, thinking about how quickly life could shift from calm to chaos. The alley had tested him, but it had also strengthened him, reinforcing lessons that training alone could not teach. The human qualities of focus, patience, and awareness had been as crucial as technique. That understanding settled in him quietly, shaping the way he moved and thought in every following moment. David's patrols became a little more mindful after that. He observed subtle signs of change, a shadow moving slightly differently, a person lingering longer than expected, a sound that didn't quite belong. He did not act on suspicion alone, but he allowed awareness to guide his actions. His movements were deliberate, measured, and calm, projecting an invisible presence of control and security that even those who did not see the confrontation could feel. One evening, while patrolling near the main gate, David noticed a group of children playing nearby. Their laughter echoed through the streets, a reminder of ordinary life continuing around the palace. He watched them quietly, aware of the importance of safety, knowing that vigilance sometimes meant watching over the smallest, seemingly inconsequential moments. Protecting a place wasn't just about stopping direct threats. It was about maintaining an environment where people could live without fear. A few palace staff approached David with small nods and smiles, offering quiet greetings. He returned each one with a nod, his eyes constantly scanning, observing, and analyzing. The awareness he had relied on in the alley now became a constant companion, guiding his movements and choices without overt strain. It was part of his life now, seamlessly integrated into his routines and interactions. David also reflected on the nature of human conflict. The three attackers had been driven by aggression and confidence, perhaps even desperation. Their actions were predictable to someone who could remain calm and focused, yet dangerous to anyone caught off guard. He thought about the countless ways human behavior could shift the balance of safety, and he recognized that true skill wasn't just physical. It was the ability to read, understand, and anticipate the intentions of others. Days turned into weeks, and life in the palace returned fully to normal. Guards rotated posts, staff performed duties, and visitors enjoyed the grounds. To most people, the events of the alley were forgotten, if they had been noticed at all. But for David, the memory remained vivid, a quiet, steady reminder of the importance of his role. It was a testament to preparation, training, and human awareness, the ability to respond decisively and calmly when chaos emerged unexpectedly. One morning, David was called again to meet the senior officer. "Your actions in the alley have set a standard for all of us," the officer said. "You demonstrated not just skill but the importance of calmness under pressure. Others have been observing, learning from your approach." David accepted the words with a polite nod. He did not boast, nor did he exaggerate the significance of what had happened. For him, the encounter had been a test of duty and discipline, and the recognition was merely an acknowledgement of professionalism done well. Yet he appreciated that his actions could serve as an example, quietly influencing others to approach their responsibilities with similar calm and awareness. That evening, David took a quiet walk through the palace gardens. The fountains glimmered in the soft lights and the scent of flowers filled the air. He allowed himself a moment of reflection, thinking about how fragile and precious life could be, how quickly a routine evening could turn into a test of skill and composure. The memory of the alley remained with him, but it no longer carried tension. Instead, it offered clarity, understanding, and reinforcement of the principles he lived by: vigilance, calm, awareness, and responsibility. As he walked, he noticed a young guard practicing drills nearby. The movements were precise but hesitant, lacking the confidence that comes from experience. David approached quietly, observing, and then offered a few suggestions. Not corrections, but guidance, small insights gained from real experience rather than books or rules. The young guard nodded, absorbing the lessons. David realized that passing on this knowledge, the calm and awareness that had allowed him to handle danger, was just as important as physical skill. It was part of maintaining safety beyond his own actions. The days continued in this rhythm. David's patrols, his observations, and his quiet reflections became part of a routine that was calm, measured, and vigilant. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythm of life, the lessons of that single minute in the alley had been fully absorbed. He understood that every day could present unexpected challenges, that every person carried intentions that might shift the balance of safety, and that composure and awareness were the keys to handling those moments successfully. Occasionally, he thought about the three attackers, wondering what they might have learned from the encounter. Their aggression had been met with calm control, their confidence met with observation and skill. Perhaps they had reconsidered their actions, or perhaps they had moved on. Either way, David knew that he had influenced them simply by maintaining control and composure. That knowledge was quietly satisfying, a reminder that true power often lay in restraint and precision rather than force and aggression. The palace grounds remained peaceful, the streets outside calm, and the routine of life uninterrupted. Visitors enjoyed the gardens, staff carried out their duties efficiently, and the flow of activity continued without incident. Yet for David, every detail carried significance: the angle of light, the movement of shadows, the subtle shifts in behavior around him. Awareness had become second nature, integrated into his every thought and action. One evening, as the sun set and the lights of the palace cast long shadows across the walls, David paused near the main gate. The city beyond was quiet, the streets sparsely populated. He allowed himself a small smile, not from pride but from satisfaction. He had maintained control in